The winds roared as the great white held domain over the ancient trees of the Amberwoods, its veil allowing only the slightest of starlight through its mighty bulwark, now encroaching upon even the stalwart Tal'azar trees of old. Therin forced himself forward, battling for each and every step, all the while cursing himself for being so foolhardy as to return to this damned forest. But he knew it was a price he would probably pay again for the slightest chance at seeing another of those magnificent creatures. However, he was not yet too proud nor foolish to admit that the situation was proving ever more precarious, and if history was anything to go by, he knew well to hold no hope that the storm held any intention to abate. Rather, he knew his best bet for survival was to look for a spot to hunker down, and to at least outlast this storm, for he knew well that the temperature was now far more dangerous than any hunger. Strength all but spent, Therin finally spotted a particularly large Tal'azar tree, its thick trunk capable of providing at least a little protection from the harassing winds. Hope rekindled, he quickly moved to take refuge at its base. Yet as he lowered to the ground, he saw a strange shifting light gleaming in the distance. Mesmerized, he watched as it seemingly swayed about, moving closer and closer. Although soft at first, it quickly grew until all but the closest trees around him shone with that strange etheric light, its luminous completely alien, even compared to the warmth of the Tal'azar at his back. Fear taking root, Therin quietly dropped even lower, trying to hide his presence from the approaching entity in fear of its identity. Transfixed, Therin waited, as a lone figure stepped forth, bound in a cloak of earthly shades, holding firm a tall wooden staff crowned with a beautiful azure stone, gleaming a brilliant gold from the reflected flames of a torch. The figure continued forth, only stopping once. He stood close enough for Therin to see the man's face, and it was an old one at that. Stranger yet, the old man gazed left to right, seemingly unfazed by the blizzard, and perhaps unaware of his presence. For a moment he held to the hope that by some miracle he had not been seen, yet he knew at heart it was a foolish thought. Almost jumping from his skin, Therin shifted as the old man looked directly down at him, all the while resting his weight on his staff. A prolonged moment passed, but eventually the old man began to speak in an unreasonably clear voice, considering how loud the blizzard was howling around them. "You need not fear me, friend of the woods." The old man took a moment to assess Therin's reaction. "Fear is often far more deadly than any apparent danger you might think that stands before you. At the very least, it is often more lethal. You showed great courage in helping the griffin, friend. So now I must ask you to do so again, as you will find no shelter down there in the snow." Therin looked to the old man, wanting to reply, but with his throat rasped from thirst and clenched by fear, he was unsure whether he would be able to hear him. Nevertheless, he tried to be as clear as possible. "What is an old man doing out in this blizzard?" The old man laughed rambunctiously. "Old, you say? I may be aged, but I am definitely not old, young man. Nevertheless, you may call me Tal'azar, but by all that is good, please don't call me old man." Tal'azar glanced sideways. "Old man. I should be offended indeed." Taken aback by Tal'azar's candor and confidence, Therin watched the man as he spoke, trying to get the measure of him. "My apologies. Tal'azar, what are you doing out here in the middle of this blizzard? You look barely able to stand." Tal'azar smiled humbly. "The cold doesn't faze me, though this snow definitely makes it slow getting around. But to your question, I guess you could say this is my home. Though I must admit, I am quite astonished, young cub. Why are you so frightened by a little wind and snow?" Finding his courage, Therin stood up and moved forward to get closer. "You call this a little snow? Are you blind as well as old? This is no mere snowfall, it's a full-blown blizzard, and a far worse one than I have ever seen." Tal'azar straightened, lifting his staff before dropping it again. A shockwave raced out in the blink of an eye, pushing the blizzard back, creating a bubble-like space around Therin and himself. "See, that's some good senses there, cub, but it begs to question. Why are you here if you know this to be true?" Distracted by the blizzard etching its way across the barrier, Therin realized what Tal'azar must be, though he could still hardly believe it, and who could blame him, especially considering all the strange occurrences that had happened over the past few weeks. How could he have ever guessed that he would meet one of them? Even as he began to come to terms with the facts of his eyes, a note of shock permeated through his voice as the word escaped his lips. "You're a Tal?" Leaning back upon his staff, Tal'azar followed Therin's gaze to the barrier. "Actually, to be more specific, I am a Tal'ar, but the distinction is minor and understandable that you would not know the difference." Tal'azar sighed, looking back to Therin. "These lands are indeed archaic, but it matters not. I know a shelter that is near. I think it would be best if we wait out this blizzard there." A flicker in the barrier drew Therin's attention briefly back before the entire barrier began moving. Looking over to Tal'azar, who was already beginning to walk south, Therin quickly followed suit. "Wait, you said that what I did was brave. But how could you know of it if you were not there? Therin fell behind a moment, coming to that realization. How long have you been watching me, and at the risk of being too frank, why? Hearing the strength in Therin's voice, Tal'azar stopped and turned to face him. I heard a disturbance carried upon the winds of the forest. It seemed a fair distance from here, about 4 nights past, and to be honest, the fact that I felt it at all suggests it was rather powerful. Tal'azar wavered a moment to think and brushed the snow from his long beard. Very powerful indeed, and old it would seem. Therin looked down, refusing to correlate the time frame with his own experience with the swords. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that the timing was far from coincidental. You've been following me for the past 4 days, then? Tal'azar laughed. No, that's not what I said. What I felt only lasted for about an hour. After that, I felt nothing. I couldn't even tell from what direction it came from. 3 days later, I heard the griffin's call and came to see what all the fuss was about. Little did I realize I would find a strange young man showing more courage than brains. Truly, for a moment, I wasn't sure if the griffins were going to attack. Alas, it would seem rather evident that they sensed something worthy about you. It was then that I decided to follow you to find out what it might be. However, I must say that it is interesting that you reacted when I mentioned the incident 4 days ago. Tal'azar raised his staff, dispelling the barrier before pointing it to Therin. A split second passed, as the howling winds rushed back into the negative space created by the barrier, and immediately Tal'azar began to whirl his staff about, pulling the ice from the air. Before Therin knew what was happening, Tal'azar thrust the staff forward, releasing a wave of freezing air that washed over Therin, like a chilling wave that pulled him from the ground and held him suspended in the air. His emotions boiling over, Therin pushed and pulled at his bonds, trying to release himself. However, they held strong, and the wind continued rasping at his flesh. As he began to panic, a wave of calm washed over him, and his emotions switched with surprising ease when suddenly he fell limp, leaving his body to the whims of his bonds. Unable to see nor feel, a calming serenity soon developed, but like pressured glass it broke to a voice calling out to him. By the blood of old, by the line of your lineage, you must awaken, for the dragon's ascension is at hand, and the time of the Tal'doran has come. The voice echoed to sound of bells beginning to ring, quietly at first, but ever increasing, until suddenly the voice boomed once again. Awaken! Waking to the taste of blood on his lips, Therin opened his eyes, but could only see a blur of white and brown. Rolling to his back, he looked up. Slowly his eyes adjusted, and to his surprise there was no longer a blizzard, but a light wind carrying a sprinkling of snow. Spitting the blood from his mouth, Therin slowly pulled himself up, but stopped as he noticed Tal'azar watching over him. What the hell was that all about? Tal'azar tilted his head. I was testing you, young cub, but I must admit that I did not foresee you having such a connection to the source, nor that you would react so severely to my interference with said connection. And to be honest, I didn't even know that you were a Tal before now. Tal'azar said, looking to the beautiful night sky. In all honesty, I feared you might be a servant of the shadow. Taking a moment to let the implication permeate his thought, he continued. Please understand there are so few of us left that I had to be certain. I thought you said that you were a Talar, not a Tal, Therin commented, trying to distract his mind from the lingering anger. Tal'azar smiled proudly. Good, you catch on quick, though this attitude of yours may prove a problem for you in the future. Tal'azar paused briefly to ponder his words. You see, Tal is a more generic term people use to refer to anyone who can use the source, but there are nuances far deeper than that, to us at least. Therin regained his footing and brushed the snow from his clothes. What do you mean by nuanced? I still don't really understand any of this, and you speak as if I should. You will have to forgive me. I haven't had many visitors for quite some time. I may have forgotten the common pleasantries. Tal'azar replied with a hint of haste permeating his voice. Unsatisfied, Therin questioned further. You attacked without warning, and you blame isolation for your behavior? You must understand I have my reasons. Come, I will tell you more. My home, it's not far, and I could really use me some tea. Stopping for a moment, Tal'azar rested his staff in the snow and gazed out upon the forest, scanning it for some purpose only he knew. Following closely, Therin came up beside him, trying to see what he was looking for, but nothing stood out. Sensing Therin's frustration growing, Tal'azar turned to him and placed a hand on his shoulder. Calm yourself, cub. The paths ahead are infinite, and the one I wish to traverse is fleeting. Head on a swivel, Therin quickly took an inquisitive stance, a single question burning in his mind. What do you mean fleeting? Does the path move by some unknown means? Raising his hand from Therin's shoulder, Tal'azar turned back to the forest. It is as I have said. Now calm yourself and listen to the wind. Shaking the doubt from his mind, Therin slowed his breath, trying to do just as Tal'azar had said. but soon he realized the wind would not so easily reveal its secrets. Therin's eyes continued to sweep over the horizon, surveying all before him. Ears perked and primed, he listened and waited for the slightest of sound, but with every passing moment his curiosity slowly changed into impatience. Suddenly something shifted in the distance. Where once there were trees and bush, now only stood a narrow, lightly used passage, veiled by a thicket of trees and a light blanket of snow. Pointing to the passage, Therin informed Tal'azar. Over there. Tal'azar smiled, clearly pleased by the news. Good, it would seem she has given us her blessing. Come, we haven't far to go now. Needing a moment to regain his strength, Tal'azar moved forward towards the passage with Therin following closely. After a few slight turns, the winding passage opened, revealing a small glade with an overgrown cabin, nestled comfortably beneath the imposing canopy of old oaks. At its centre stood a lone Tal'azar, greater than any he had ever seen before. Its canopy stood sentinel over the entire glade, and its peak towering far above the oaks beside it. At its base, the familiar sound of running water could be heard trickling southward into a partially frozen lake. Finding Therin completely transfixed on the glade, Tal'azar felt a little guilty as he moved to interrupt his moment of bewilderment. Come, the tea will not boil itself. Therin jolted a little as Tal'azar spoke, however he hid it well with a question. You never told me what tea is, though. If it is boiled, I would assume it's some kind of drink. You assume correctly, but it is more than just a heated drink. Tal'azar smiled as they arrived at the cabin. You will see. With his staff resting against the intricately carved outline of an eagle in flight, Tal'azar applied light pressure upon the door, and to Therin's astonishment it swung open. Showing complete comfort, he walked inside, placed his large pointy hat on a hook beside the door, and leant his staff against the wall beside it. Following Tal'azar into the cabin, Therin looked across the room, but fell back completely humbled by the cabin's aesthetic. The tables, chairs, and furniture looked as if each was grown purposefully, its utility carved meticulously from its bulk. I have never seen wood fashion such as this. It is of my design, Tal'azar answered, searching through one of the cabinets attached to the wall. Finding what he sought, Tal'azar pulled out a large metal pitcher made from fine silver. Could you be a good lad and fetch some water from the stream outside? When you return, I'll tell you of the dragons. Shocked by the casual mention of dragons, Therin gestured in a slight bow. Are you sure the water is clean? That's a smart question, though I don't really know for sure, although I do believe so. I drink from it regularly, and it hasn't harmed me yet. Tal'azar laughed. Therin smiled in reply as the humour caught him by surprise. Noticing Tal'azar turning to look for something else, Therin picked the pitcher up and moved to fetch the water. Pushing the door open, Therin stepped outside, but a flash of fur suddenly drew his eye. Looking up, he saw a deer staring directly at him. He could not help but wonder if it could be the same stag as he had seen the previous day. With that realization setting in, Therin stepped forward slowly, yet it remained still. By chance are you following me? I sure hope not, for the last time we met you almost skewered me. Therin looked on, unsure as to how he should continue. Perhaps you dislike the arrow. I apologize about that, but you must understand even now the hunger still nags at me. Having mentioned his stomach, Therin felt the vice-like grip upon his suppressed feeling beginning to wane. Heeding its call, he nervously turned and moved to the stream. Kneeling, Therin placed the pitcher into the gently flowing water. As the pitcher filled, Therin heard the deer's soft steps coming closer. Looking up, he watched as the creature lowered its head and began to drink straight from the stream. Content, Therin found himself watching as the animal drank its fill, completely comfortable with his presence. The deer quickly finished and before long walked off, disappearing into the brush. With the pitcher now full of water, Therin followed suit, returning to the cabin. Upon pushing open the door, Tal'azar turned to Therin, a question burning upon his lips. Young cub, who were you speaking to out there just now? Therin stopped mid-step, as the week's events were becoming too much for his mind to sort out. There was a white deer in the glade with a crown of gold, and for some reason I swear that I saw it earlier, twice in fact, but it can't be the same one, could it? Because that would be insane. I mean, it's either that or I'm seeing things, though these days either option seems completely possible. Therin placed the pitcher on the bench and took a seat at the table exhausted, for the night's late hour had finally caught up with him. Detecting the clear exhaustion in Therin's voice, Tal'azar turned to face him with a bright red apple in hand. Here, take this. It should return some colour to your face. Passing the fruit to Therin, he continued. The Amberwoods is full of life, even though it is rarely seen. Now this deer you speak of, I would say you are perhaps correct, though a white deer would be quite rare. Tal'azar sat on that thought for a moment, allowing the description to settle in his mind. I believe the creature may have been Arnaxus. He has walked these grounds for the longest time, and with luck he will walk them ever longer. Well, I'm grateful my arrow missed its mark then. However, how is it possible for me to not recall the deer being white? I have been in its presence twice now, and I swear it was like any other. Yet I have a strong feeling that it is the same deer. I just do not understand how. Therin fell back, trying to wrap his head around this conundrum. Arnaxis does not grace many with his presence, but when he does, it is of great importance, and take heart. I doubt any arrow could find him so easily. Tal'azar pondered the question, but the sound of boiling water drew him away. Using a ladle, Tal'azar poured the hot water through a cross mesh of fine wire, holding a mixture of roughly ground leaves. The water quickly spilled through and came out a deep amber colour as it fell into the cups upon the table. Sputtering from the bitter taste, Therin looked to Tal'azar, who was laughing. Here, this will pull the flavours together. Tal'azar dropped 2 small grape-sized objects into the hot brew, its mass dissolving quickly. Hesitant at first, Therin took another mouthful of tea, but this time he found the flavours exceptional, without a hint of bitterness remaining. You're right, this tea has no equal, though I must admit I do not have much experience in the finer things the world has to offer. Tal'azar pulled a platter of bread wrapped in a large leaf from the cupboard and placed it on the table. You still have much time ahead of you, young cub. If I were to make a guess, I think your journey may have just begun. Therin again fell back into the chair with a roll of bread in hand. If my life so far is anything to go by, it will be a journey cut tragically short. Therin looked to the door as it creaked. All jokes aside though, I'm tired of fate testing me at every turn. Therin, fate is but an empty word. To see beyond the simplicity of its meaning, you must understand that which pulls the strings beyond. Tal'azar paused for a moment. The first thing you must understand is fate is not a single entity, but many, each vying for dominance over the others. By your will, I could assist in determining which of the great entities hold sway over you. You still worry that I may be a servant of the shadow? Therin questioned, leaving a challenging note hanging in the air. Tal'azar held a moment, understanding well why Therin went on the defense. No, I do not believe you to be a servant of the shadow. Quite the opposite, in fact. As I have said before, you may in fact be a Tal, though how this is the case I'm not so sure. But I do, however, intend to find out, with your help of course. Apologies, Tal'azar, but I do not see your meaning. How can I ever be a Tal? I'm just a simple blacksmith with a tragic tale, not unlike many others. Therin questioned, his curiosity ever searching for answers. I will elaborate. I did not say that you were a Tal, only that you may become one. You see, young Therin, there has not been a new Tal born in well over 1,000 years. Although that is not to say it's in any way abnormal per se, but this cycle is far too young for a new Tal to rise. You still speak as if I should know any of this, but I do not. Seriously. Me a Tal. Many would laugh at the notion. One in particular comes to mind, actually. Therin replied with a slight wince as he tried to grasp Tal'azar's meaning. Wait, if a new Tal hasn't risen for 1,000 years, how old are you? Truthfully, I can't remember. I am, however, counted amongst the oldest of our order, for I have lived through 4 cycles. Tal'azar clarified. Take this stone, it will help me see your lineage upon the wind. How do you mean, on the wind? Therin questioning further. Tal'azar reached for his staff. I shall show you. Now concentrate on the wind. I will guide you to the power inside. There you will find your answer. Therin looked at the stone, his reflection mirrored back at him. In that moment, his mind became adrift as time slowed, and raw energy burst into existence, as a divine energetic light rode the currents of air as they crossed the room. Before long, the flow of time began to return to its normal state, and the light dispersed in a flicker. Tal'azar, I saw it, the power in the wind, slowly making its way across the room. Very good, cub. As I have said, I am of the Talar, herald of the wind. Tal'azar took a moment, as a piece of information that Therin spoke caught his attention. The wind, you mentioned it being slow. What did you mean by this? Did you mean it was slower than you expected, or that it seemed to slow down? Curious about his meaning, Therin clarified. I mean that time slowed considerably, or maybe my perception of it increased. Which is more accurate, I'm not so sure, but I can say that this is not the first time it has happened. No, that can't be. Tal'azar said softly, thinking on the meaning of his words. Although it is very interesting. Therin, can you focus on the stone again, just like you did before, only this time think on slowing time? Tal'azar watched Therin intently as he raised his staff, intending to slam it into the ground. However, as his staff descended, the world around him suddenly slowed, before freezing completely. Unable to free himself from this state, Tal'azar found his mind pulling back against the realization to what this could mean. With the answer out of his reach, he suddenly felt the power fading, and his staff fell to the floor. Finding himself on the ground, Therin slowly stood up, apologizing. My apologies, it has never been so strong, nor has it held me so tightly. It used the entirety of my will just to pull myself back. Leaning down to retrieve his staff from the floor, Tal'azar softened his face in an effort to ease Therin's worry. No need for apologies, young cub. Though I must say that does indicate that you are indeed a Tal. Well, to be more specific, you're a Talorn, an Archon of Time. A word of advice, though. You must keep this quiet, at least for now, for it has ramifications you will wish to avoid. Unable to read Tal'azar's expression, Therin questioned further. So, you say I'm a Talorn. You look unusually shaken. Why is that? You are the one who told me that I was a Tal to begin with, and now that it has been confirmed, you don't believe it? To be honest with you, Therin, if I had not seen it myself, I would not have believed it. It makes no sense, or rather, it should not be possible, for this is only the 5th cycle. You should not be here, not for a long time anyway. No, there is something amiss here, and I must get to the bottom of it. Unsure how to react, Therin shifted his focus to another question. What are these cycles you mentioned, Tal'azar? You have spoken of them a few times now, but I haven't a clue what they are. Tal'azar could only smile as he looked at the young man standing before him. It will be hard to explain, but I'll try.